Well, it is a joy to be here. Thanks for welcoming me, and I'm looking forward to spending the evening talking about the next story, talking about really Christians and our relationship with technology. And what I want to do then is talk about life in this world. I think those of us who've been around for a little while kind of realize that we were living in a different world and getting along pretty much okay in that world. And then our technology's changed, and we've entered into this new world. It really is a new world. And a lot of us are wondering how to live well in a world like this, how to live in a distinctly Christian way in a world like this, in a world dominated by social media and email and cell phones and Twitter and blogging and all of these sorts of things that are relatively new, or really very new to our human experience. Many of us are realizing it's pretty difficult to live well with these things. We've been faced with many challenges. And yet, I think we also have confidence that we can live well in this world. But to do that, we're going to need God's help. We're going to need to think distinctly Christianly in this world to live well in it. If you look back through human history, you see that the world has changed again and again through history. Last 2,000 years, there have been multiple transformations in the world around us. And almost every time the big transformations happen around technology, new technologies enter into the world, and the world is transformed. And in our day, we're just at the edge, just at the cusp of another one of these massive transformations. And it's one that affects us all. It's come to us with the digital world. And so we've had this digital transformation that affects each and every one of us. And that's what I want to focus on tonight. Maybe we should start with a few numbers. We can start by asking, what's up? Asking about some numbers that are going up over time. First number is 7:38. That's 7 hours and 38 minutes. Anyone got any guesses what 7 hours and 38 minutes might represent at this day and age? Yeah, it represents screen time. Screen time for children between age 8 and 18, daily average screen time, 7 hours and 38 minutes. Now, you just go back in time about 30 years, and that average would have been 0. Fast forward 30 years, 7 hours and 38 minutes. So about half of our kids' waking hours is now spent in front of a screen. That is a brand new reality. This is a brand new thing, and we're just learning to adapt. We're just learning what it means to live our lives in the glare of these little glowing rectangles. This is a new thing. And so 7 hours, 38 minutes, and that number continues to rise, continues to go up over time. Another number for you. If I can get my slide to change here. 3,364. Give you a second to think about what 3,364 might represent. Any guesses? That number is also rising. 3,364 is the average number of text messages a teenager sends per month today. And again, that number is going up. So you go back 12 years, 15 years, the average text messages sent would have been about 0. Today, 3,364. This has to mean something, right? This can't mean nothing. In a very small period of time, when measured against human history, we've added something that's now become dominant. It's become very important in the lives of young people, and probably if you did the math for many of you, those numbers wouldn't be a whole lot different. So 3,364 text messages a month is not good, it's not evil, but it's something. It's got to mean something to the human experience. Talk about some more numbers. So 70% represents the amount of porn that today is consumed on mobile devices. And so you go back a few years ago when we started to, as parents, started to realize that pornography was becoming a thing that our kids were encountering online, something they were struggling with. The vast majority of that pornography was consumed on the family computer. You remember when you had one computer per family, And the advice from Covenant Eyes and other people was to put that computer in a public place in the home where mom and dad can see it and keep eyes on it. And that was working kind of okay, but then we gave all our kids their own computers, essentially, and their mobile phones, their iPods, all of that. And very quickly, pornography migrated from that computer into people's pockets, into these mobile devices. And so we were just adapting to this world where we understood pornography was an issue, and we had to make this change then to adapting to people looking at it on smaller screens, increasingly smaller screens. So 70% of pornography today is consumed on mobile devices. Again, that matters because our kids are getting these devices when they're very young, carrying these devices with them all the time. It's the first thing they look at in the morning. It's the last thing they look at before they go to bed. And it's become this huge carrier of pornography. Another number is 11, and this number is going down. If you hazard a guess as to what that might mean, that is the average age of first exposure to pornography now through the internet. And this number keeps going down. When I first started researching, it was probably around 13. A couple of years ago, it was down to 12, and now it's down to 11. So average age of first exposure to pornography now all the way down to age 11. And just think about what that does to a person, does to a child, and you're that young. You've not even been exposed really to the whole notion of sexuality, but now you're exposed to it online, and you're watching stuff that's really especially base and vile. That changes. So all of this to say, the world is changing very, very quickly. The world is, technology has brought about all kinds of changes. Digital technology brought all kinds of changes to the world. So what do we do about it? How do we as human beings, how do we as Christians adapt to life in this world and live it well? All right, we'll try it. So how do we relate? Now what? As this world has changed, we're now in this world, whether we like it or not. There's no going back to the last world. How do we respond? How can we live well in a world like this one? And I think Christians tend to embrace one of three different options when it comes to relating to these new technologies. The first would be enthusiastic embrace. That's where new technology comes along and you just immediately jump all over it. You unthinkingly accept that technology. And so if one option is enthusiastic embrace, the next would be a kind of strict separation, just keeping away from all technology. Instead of embracing anything, you reject it all as the easier option. It's kind of the Amish approach, you might say, to technology, where you just shove it all aside and choose to live as much as you can in a previous world. And I live near Amish communities, and it's a joy to see how they live and to enjoy how they live, but you also know it's not sustainable in a world like this. And so my preferred option, rather than that strict separation or that enthusiastic embrace, would be just a disciplined discernment, where we as Christians really train ourselves to think well about our technologies, where we really train ourselves to think well about what God has given us and how we can use those things in a way that avoids the issues and in a way that embraces the good that comes with it. And we can do that, we can have confidence that we can do that because we're indwelled by the Spirit of God. And God tells us, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And so what we're doing as Christians is constantly having our minds renewed by the Word of God. What I'd like to see from Christians is better thinking when it comes to the world of technology than non-Christians. We have access to the mind of God through His Word, so we should be thinking differently than unbelievers. One of my fears is that unbelievers are actually leading the way. Most of the good material written, the good material produced about how to live well in this world is not created by Christians, but by non-Christians. So I'm thankful to see more books coming along teaching us how to think Christianly about these things. I hope there's much more to come. One thing we need to think of, and if you could turn to the slide about the digital divide, please. One of the things we need to be aware of is that in the world around us right now, we've got two very different kinds of people. We could put a line around the year 1980 or so and say that's the line that divides two different groups of people in society. If you were born before 1980, we could say that you're a digital immigrant. You were born in a pre-digital world, and you've had to immigrate into this new digital world. If you were born after 1980, we could say you're a digital native. So this is the world you were born into, it's the only world you've ever known, and you're a native of this world. And that's important because these two groups of people are seeing the world in a very, very different way. So my son, born in the year 2000, actually my son didn't get introduced by Jim. I have a son as well, but he does not live with us now. He's at college in Louisville, Kentucky, so I think that's why he got overlooked. But my son was born in the year 2000. He was born into a different world from the one I was born in. I was born in the 70s. He was born in 2000. So I was born before the personal computer came into everybody's house. I was born in that sense. Computers existed, but they weren't yet into our homes in the same way. My son was born into a world where everybody has a computer on them at all times, and that's just considered normal. And so the world you're born into, you take as the world as it always has been, just the world at its most normal. And so I'm seeing the world differently from him. I remember that world I told you about earlier where we got along just fine, even though we didn't have a phone in our pockets all the time. And we somehow managed to survive without being able to text one another 3,364 times a month. So this digital divide is dividing society into people who see the world very, very differently. That's just something important to remember as you're engaging with people across the generations. So for our time this evening, I really just want to work on two big lessons. Two big lessons that you can think about and you can apply in your own life, and I think in your own family, maybe even in your own church. And the first one is this: all technology is God's technology. And what I mean is that there's a distinctly Christian way, as I've been hinting at, a distinctly Christian way to think about technology. If we go to God's Word, we'll be able to see what God wants us to believe about technology. And so we need to begin at the beginning to understand that. In Genesis 1, we read, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image according to our likeness.'" We are made in the image of God. So what does it mean that we're created in the image of God, and how on earth does that pertain to technology? Well, we're made in the image of God in a number of ways. In one way, we're made in the image of God socially. We're social beings. We were created for fellowship with God and fellowship with one another. And isn't it interesting that as you look at the technologies that dominate the world today, so many of them are communications technologies. All the social media we have, our phones, these are all for socializing with one another in different ways. We're social beings made in the image of a social God. We're also made in God's image morally. We're able to choose right and wrong. Animals can't do this. My dog has never pondered, well, back when I had a dog, we did until recently, my dog never ponders life and thinks about the goodness of God and decides to reject the will of her creator. Dogs don't do that, but human beings do. We're moral beings. We're able to choose right and wrong. We're also made in God's image mentally. We're rational beings. We're social beings. We're moral beings, and we're rational, mental beings. We're able to think and to reason. And all this because we're made in the image of God. Really, we're created in the image of a creative God. God has given us His creative desire, His creative ability. Animals don't create. They operate out of instinct, but they don't ponder and invent and create. But we do, because we're made in the image of this creative God. So we're created in God's image. But that's not all. God created us in His image, and then He gave us a job description. We read about that in the book of Genesis. God blessed them, humanity, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So we're created in God's image, and then given this big two-part job description. The first part of it is procreation. We as human beings were to be fruitful and multiply, to populate the earth and to build families and churches and schools and governments and cities, all of that good thing. Be fruitful and multiply, beginning with two people, expanding to fill the earth. The second part was dominion, to subdue the earth, to harness the natural world as God gave it to us, to plant crops and build bridges and design computers and compose music and all those elements of what God has called us to do, to have dominion. And so in all this, we're given this mandate to use our creativity, this mandate to invent new technologies. And here's what's interesting. We not only can invent new technologies, but in order to be obedient to God, we must create new technologies. So this is important. It means that technology in that sense is good. Technology is something that's very important. It's not only cell phones and computers. Technology is writing. Technology is the wheel. Technology is the book. I said earlier, we kind of have this functional idea that technology is anything that was created after I was born. But that's not it. Everything's technology. You think about Adam and Eve created just two naked people in a garden with this command from God to expand over the entire earth. If they were to obey God, they had to invent. They had to create. They could not fulfill their God-given mandate without applying their God-given creativity to just solving the problems of expanding across the entire globe. And that mandate has not been taken away from us. We still have it, to procreate, to fill the earth, and to exercise dominion over it by expanding to fill the earth and harvesting, taking advantage of all its resources. And then added to that, in the New Testament era, we've been given the Great Commission as well. And if we're to carry out that Great Commission of taking the gospel to the entire world, to every people group on the earth, we'll need technology for that as well. So in that sense, technology is good. So what is technology? You might say it's the creative activity of using tools to shape God's creation for practical purposes. That's a mouthful. But essentially, technology is just making stuff that makes our lives better. It's really that simple. Technology is making stuff that makes our lives better. People needed to get from point A to point B. They invented the wheel as a way of doing that better than walking. People needed to get across a sea. They invented a boat. That's a faster way than walking around it. That's really all technology is, making stuff that makes our lives better. And if we're thinking about it Christianly, then hopefully we're also thinking making stuff that makes other people's lives better. This mandate we have to do good for others, not just to ourselves. So we create stuff that makes people's lives better, that makes their lives safer, that makes their lives more comfortable, that allows us as human beings to carry out our God-given mandate. Okay, so let's think for a minute. God made us creative, and he told us to create as part of our God-given job description. Therefore, shouldn't we be able to conclude that technology only ever makes our lives better? Wouldn't that be a realistic conclusion? God told us to do it, and so we do it as part of our God-given marching orders. So shouldn't technology only ever make our lives better? Well, no, it doesn't. You can go to the next slide. We wish it did, but it doesn't. So why is it that technology doesn't only ever make our lives better, but sometimes technology actually makes our lives worse? Well, that's simply because sin broke everything. Sin is an intruder into this world, and it messed up absolutely everything. And technology did not escape. It's not like when the world fell into sin and corruption and decay entered the world. It's not like technology remained unscathed. It too is subject to the fall. Sin broke everything. And so here's what that leads to on the other side of the fall into sin, is that technology can be used for good. Technology can be used for evil. We can use it to accomplish very, very good things that are honoring to God, that further our God-given mission. We can use technology for very, very evil things that separate us from God and disrupt our God-given mission. And so the question before each one of us is just, how do we use our technology? We have the choice before us every day. Will I use this to accomplish good, or will I use this to accomplish evil? Now, I want to show something that I think is so, so important, and something only Christians can think about, at least rightly. And it's this: we are all worshipers. God created us to be worshipers. We all worship something. And because technology is so closely tied to our comfort, it's so closely tied to our survival, it's exactly the kind of thing that we can worship. We're not going to bow down to it, but it still becomes an idol. It becomes something we can give too much prominence to. And I want to show this to you. I think this is very, very important. If we're going to identify the place technology has in our own lives, and I think the way most of us are thinking, the lives of our children, we need to understand this one. So here's the key. We are idolaters at heart. As sinful human beings, people who live in this sinful world, we still have sinful hearts. We are idolaters. And we can see that in Romans chapter 1. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. They exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. And so at the heart of the human condition is this. We will turn our backs on the Creator and instead give our loyalty to something that's been created. Instead of finding our ultimate joy and comfort in the Creator God, we find our joy and comfort in something created by God in one way or another. Singer and author Matt Papa says this: an idol, simply put, is anything that is more important to you than God. Think about that. An idol is anything that is more important to you than God. It is anything that has outweighed God in your life. Anything you love, trust, or obey more than God. Anything that has replaced God as essential to your happiness. That's an idol. That's a lowercase g kind of God. And that might be different for each one of us. Each one of us is tempted to trust something or someone other than God. But the specific thing we set our loyalty on, we give our allegiance to, that can be different for each one of us. Now, of course, we tend to think we're too sophisticated for idols. When we think of idols, we think of wood and stone, right? Things that have been carved or created out of wood or out of stone. But Tim Keller says everything can be and everything has been an idol. That includes technology. Or John Calvin said, we gather that man's nature, so to speak, is a perpetual factory of idols. And I think in our moments of introspection, we can see that each one of us is so prone, especially in our greatest moments or our worst moments, so prone to set our hearts on something or someone other than God. We've all been there. In those moments when God just isn't enough, when Christ just isn't enough for us, there's something our heart thinks, if I just had this, I'd be satisfied. Now, sometimes technology itself is what we worship. And again, not in the sense that we bow down to it, but in the sense that we put our hope in it. And I want to give you this example. I'm going to read you a long quote. And just kind of, I know it's long, and I'm not supposed to read quotes this long. It's against all the rules of public speaking. But I want you to just kind of vaguely pay attention, because I think it shows something that is very, very common in our day and age. So I'm going to read this quote. You put up with it, and then I'll explain it at the end. So this comes from a magazine, and somebody's talking about the promise of technology. There's a specific technology they're talking about, but just listen to the wording they use to describe this. Understanding the mind and brain will enable the creation of a new species of intelligent machine systems that can generate economic wealth on a scale hitherto unimaginable. Within a half century, intelligent machines might create the wealth needed to provide food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care, a clean environment, and physical and financial security for the entire world population. Intelligent machines may eventually generate the production capacity to support universal prosperity and financial security for all human beings. Thus, the engineering of mind, that technology they're talking about, it's much more than the pursuit of a scientific curiosity. It is more even than a monumental technological challenge. It is an opportunity to eradicate poverty and usher in a golden age for all humankind. So, blah, 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 blah. Here's the important stuff. First, just listen to the promises of this technology. The first one, universal prosperity. Second one, financial security. Third one, the eradication of poverty. The fourth one, the ushering in of a golden age for all humankind. You can go to the next slides. Does that remind you of something? It sounds an awful lot like heaven, doesn't it? But how are we going to get this heaven? How are we going to come into this state where everybody's happy, where all poverty has been eradicated, and there's financial security for everybody, and there's this new golden age for humanity? How will we get to this heavenly, blissful state? Will it be through the return of Jesus Christ? No. It's going to be through technology. So if you believe that, then what is your Savior? Who is your Savior? Technology itself is the Savior of humankind. If we can only evolve enough in our technology, if we can only create the right stuff, then at last we will come into this state of bliss. So technology is the idol. Technology is the God in this worldview. Now, I would imagine we could poll this room, and none of us here would say, yeah, my hope is ultimately in technology. I really believe that if we just get the right technologies, then we'll enter into this golden age. So I don't think that would be true of us, because we're Christians and we're thinking through a biblical lens. But technology can still play a devious role in our lives. And that's when technology becomes a kind of enabler, the enabler of other idols in our lives. Technology has this way of enhancing or magnifying the power of whatever idols we've got in our lives. This is so important to see. Think about this. What do you love more than you love God? And I would say ultimately nothing, but in those moments when you're not satisfied in Christ, in those moments when your heart is just discontent, what is it that promises joy? It's going to be different for each one of us, and you don't have to answer out loud. But when you're not satisfied in Jesus Christ, you know He's meant to be your satisfaction. You know on a theological level that Jesus Christ is all you need. But in those moments when your heart is rebellious and He's not satisfying enough, those moments when you're just plain discontent, what is it that promises joy? What is it that promises fulfillment? What's that thing where you think, if I just have this, then I'll be content? Or if I don't have this, how can I possibly be content? So what is it that promises fulfillment or satisfaction? For some people, it's money. Just need more money. If I get more money, I'll be content. Power. I just need power. I need position. I need prominence. I need more than what that other person has, and then at last I'll be content. Sex, sexual fulfillment, popularity, success. These are all different idols, different things that promise us the satisfaction that really we're meant to find in Christ. Well, let's think about a couple of examples then. If your idol is the pleasure of sexuality, think about that good gift of a computer and that good gift of the internet, things that can be used to accomplish such good. They can bring about such benefits in our lives. In those moments when you're not content in Jesus Christ, and that right there, sexual pleasure is your idol, how will you use those good gifts of technology, of your computer, of the internet? Well, you'll probably go online and look at pornography. You're taking the good gifts and you're engaging them through that idolatrous heart. Or for some people, it's money. Unless I have more money, I cannot be content. If I get more money, then at last I'll be content. Then at last I'll find contentment. And so you got this discontent, idolatrous heart that's thinking Christ isn't enough. I need money. So use that good technology of your phone, the good technology of the internet, things that can accomplish such good, and you might go online and gamble. You see how it works? We can use technology to further the power of idols in our lives. So we've got these idols, we've got these things that draw our hearts. Then we take these amazing gifts of technology and we use them not to pursue God, but to pursue an idol, not to further our relationship with God, but actually to distance ourselves from God, to grow closer, as it were, to whatever that idol is in our life. So no wonder then that we love our technology. It gives us what we want, right? Our technology enhances the power of idols in our lives. And even if you can't see this in your own life, I'm sure you can see it in the life of your children. It's sometimes easier to see it in theirs. But when they've got an idol in their life, something that their heart is drawn toward, these technologies, these digital technologies, their phone, internet connection, social media, these things can drive them straight into the arms of that idol. So, all technology is God's technology. There is a distinctly Christian way to think about technology. Only Christians can think in this kind of way, thinking about idols, thinking about the necessity, the importance of pursuing Christ with our whole heart, and what happens when we deviate from that. So hopefully as Christians, we can think about this in a way that is distinctly biblical. So that's the first thing I want you to understand, just the way technology functions, a good gift of God that we can misuse so badly. Another thing I want you to see is that every technology brings risk and opportunity. Every technology we introduce into society, every technology we introduce into our homes, every technology we introduce into our lives, even every technology we introduce into our churches, every technology we introduce brings something good, but it always brings something bad. It brings opportunity, but it always introduces risk as well. And sometimes that's pretty easy to see. Think about a technology like nuclear fission, if you will. Pretty easy to see in a technology like that how to use it well and how to use it poorly. So you can use the technology of nuclear fission to power a city. My city is powered largely by nuclear fission. I'm thankful for it. But you can use roughly that same technology to also blow up a city. The same technology can be used in two different ways. We introduce nuclear fission into society. We get this great opportunity, to cheap and plentiful source of power, but we also introduce this risk that it can be used to cause great destruction as well. But sometimes the risk and the opportunity is a little more difficult to see. Think about your mobile phone. Your iPhone. You introduce this thing into your life, and you just pick it up at the store. You kind of, I don't know, why did we all get our first cell phones? I guess people were just telling us we had to, or it was being advertised, and we thought it was a safety device or something. I don't know, but at some point, each one of us got our first mobile phone, our first cell phone. And over time, it just started to change us, didn't it? It just quietly changed us. The good and the bad effects just came out as we were using it. And there's so many technologies, really almost every technology works this way. We don't know how it's going to influence us. We don't know how it's going to change us until it actually already has changed us. Think about, well, maybe it's a little bit like medications in that way. You take a medication for one thing, and it helps you in that way, but it seems like it always causes something negative as well, which, again, is, I think, just life in a Genesis 3 rather than a Genesis 2 kind of world, a world after the fall. Yeah, it brings us benefits, but it brings us risks as well. Think about television, a technology we probably take for granted now, and really a technology that in some ways is already cresting. We're already kind of moving into a post-television world as we gain as we have other screens in our lives. But television came with some big benefits. It gave us shared experiences. It moved information in a whole new way. I think about some of the great moments in the history of television with the space race, or even something like 9/11, how it unified the world around these common images that everybody across the world at the same time was watching. It allowed us to experience, to see what was happening in the world, and really brought people together in a way that wouldn't have happened if that had all been carried through newspapers a day or 2 days later. So television gave us shared experiences. It gave us access to information. These were benefits. But it also changed us. It utterly destroyed community. There was a time when people used to be entertained outside of their houses in community. television came along, and people began to be entertained within their houses outside of community. And so we went from being people who would go outside our homes to being people who would stay in our homes. Technology changed the morals of society. We can't imagine the kind of the new views of homosexuality that have come over the last few years. We can't imagine that happening without shows like Will and Grace or other things where those ideas were carried by television, carried by shows. We started to laugh at homosexuality, to regard it lightly in a comedic way. Television changed our morals from within our homes. None of us knew this was going to happen. It just happened. We just used this technology, we brought it into our homes, and it just began to change us. Every new technology has some benefits and some drawbacks. There's actually a neighborhood in Toronto, so maybe it must have been about 15 years ago now. There was a time in Toronto where the power went out for about a day and a half. It was actually America's fault. Something happened down in Ohio, and it blacked out part of Toronto. Actually all of Toronto, but there was one neighborhood that stayed out for an especially long time, and that neighborhood, everybody got home from work and they went inside and tried turning on the TV and nothing worked, and so nobody knew what to do. So they did this weird thing. They went outside and they started talking to their neighbors and actually meeting their neighbors and chatting with their neighbors. And that neighborhood decided they would make this a new holiday in the neighborhood where every day on that year they would keep their TVs off and they'd actually get together and talk, the one time when they'd actually met one another. But that just shows the power of television, how it changed us from people who are outside our homes to people who are inside our homes. Anyways, here's the thing. We tend to believe that our new technologies are primarily beneficial. We're very, very good at seeing the opportunity that will come with a new technology. We're very, very bad at seeing the risk that will come with a new technology, which makes sense. Because if we're engaging with our technologies, at least to some degree on the basis of idolatry, it makes sense that we'd see those benefits but hide ourselves from the drawbacks. So you think about that mobile phone. At some point, you somehow convinced yourself, I guess, that you had to get an iPhone. But I wonder if it ever occurred to you before you got it that someday you'd really lose the ability to have a conversation with people because you'd constantly be looking down at that thing. You know what it's like when you're talking with someone and you hear that buzz in their purse or pocket, and you may as well just walk away at that point because their mind is now fully engaged on what buzzed there, what happened in I need to see that thing. And you can just see you've lost their attention. Did you imagine that you'd be sitting in church someday totally distracted by your phone, that instead of hearing the word preached, you'd be looking at your phone and sending messages to people? You didn't think about these things. People who signed up for Facebook, it just seemed like a great way to keep up with other people, but not that many really thought about the fact that maybe it would lead them to an old friend, an old boyfriend, an old girlfriend, an old flame. It would lead to an affair and to divorce. The number of divorce proceedings now that cite Facebook somewhere in the paperwork is through the roof. So people saw the benefits of these technologies. They didn't see the risk. They assessed the benefits. And the benefits are easy to see because they're written on the box. When you go to the store and you buy that thing, it's written right there, all the great things it'll do for you. But the drawbacks, they take a long time to find out. I'll give you an example. In the 1980s, everyone was telling parents that you need to buy your kids a computer. Right? Everybody needs a computer. These things are the future. Go out and buy one. And so everybody went out and bought a computer, and they brought it into their home, and they handed it to their kids, and they said, figure this thing out. This thing's the future. And so we did. That was my generation, and it was amazing. They only had 4 colors, and they couldn't really do much, but it was an amazing technology. Then the 90s came along, and this thing called the internet happened, and everybody was told, you need to get your kids on the internet. This thing is the future. Hook up your computer to the internet. There's like encyclopedias out there and stuff. Your kids need this. And so all the parents went out, and they got their AOL account, and they hooked up the computer to the internet, and they gave it to their kids, and they said, figure this thing out. And literally an entire generation of teenage boys got addicted to internet pornography. Now, can you think of a single person who before this happened was saying, hang on a second, If we take all the teenage boys in the world and we give them screens and cameras and connect them to one another, something bad's going to happen. Nobody saw this thing coming. Now, in retrospect, we look back and we realize there's no other way this ever could have gone. This was going to happen. Pornography was going to be a problem. But nobody saw it coming. People saw the benefits of the technology. They didn't see the risks of the technology, even though it was so clear. Now, why is that? You can go to the next slide. Because the benefits of a technology are usually immediately apparent. The risks of a technology, those usually just become apparent over time. It just takes a long time, on the whole, for us to assess a technology enough to understand the risk. And as much as we might tease the Amish for the way they live, this is exactly why they're so slow to bring new technologies into their communities, because they have a much better appreciation that we see the benefits but not the risks. They're pretty happy living life the way they are. They're going to bring in new technologies only after they fully understand the risks that may come. We, on the other hand, tend to move boldly and then suffer the consequences in a much deeper way. So, in any new technology, there is always risk and there's always opportunity. We can and should be thinking Christianly about our technology. I hope we can. I'm going to wrap up, but let me just give a few quick applications of all this, and that kind of where the rubber meets the road as we live the digital life. A few challenges to life in this world. Okay, I'll just set up a few of the different challenges that are coming our way as we start living through digital devices. The first is a challenge of mediation. Think about all the things we used to do face-to-face that we now do through a screen, like banking. Do you remember talking to somebody in a bank? It was horrible. You used to have to go in and actually interact with someone. Actually communicating with people, like you used to have to talk to them. Now you're telling your friends, like, why don't you guys... Okay, my wife has a close friend we live in townhouses, so there's a wall this thick between our homes, and they text back and forth between that cinder block wall. Like, why don't you just go sit outside and chat, like face-to-face? But they text through the wall. That's something that we used to do as neighbors. We would go outside and we would talk, but now we just text. Church, a lot of people choosing to go to online church instead of going to church for real in the real world. Education, how many people are now studying through the internet, studying through a screen instead of in a classroom setting. And of course, sexuality, that's all that pornography is. So there's lots of things we used to do face-to-face that are now done through media. They're now done in a mediated way. Not all of them are bad. It's not necessarily bad to text somebody, but it is different that you're now living a mediated life, something that stands between you. But sometimes I think we can see the weirdness of this. Just imagine a young man sitting alone and he's writing a letter to his wife, and he's just like writing to her and saying, I just cannot wait to be with you again. That sounds very normal, right? They're separated by space. He just wants to be, so he's sending her a letter because he can't be face-to-face with her. He's sending her a letter saying, I can't wait to be with you. But what would be weird is if he was standing face-to-face with her and said, I can't wait to be apart from you so I can write you a letter. That doesn't make sense, because we know face-to-face, being in the same space is better. It's the great hope of the gospel. It's what we as Christians are looking forward to, being face-to-face with our Savior. And so I think as Christians, as people living in this world now, we ought to be emphasizing and re-emphasizing immediate, as in like face-to-face communication. I think we as pastors can get really lazy here, especially thinking that a text message to somebody who's hurting is the same as going, visiting, and praying with that person. No, there's something about being in the same space together, something about being face-to-face that matters, taking away those media and being with people. It, I think, still has great importance, and as the world around us moves more and more to doing so many things through a screen, there's real joy as Christians. And one of the things we offer this world, this mediated world, is this, Christians getting together in a local church setting and just being together, crossing barriers, people of different ethnicities, different ages, different life stages, getting together, worshiping together in the same place. The absolute worst thing we could do is allow church to become a mediated experience. I think as people are getting lonely, people are not together anymore, this is something we offer, local church settings. So one great challenge is mediation. Another is distraction. You've probably experienced this from iPhone version 1 to iPhone version 11 or whatever you've got now. Our devices are evolving toward distraction. You probably noticed this. The early cell phones did not do a whole lot. They just rang. That was about the sum total of what they did. Now these things are just constantly beeping and buzzing, drawing our attention, distracting us from what we're doing. We've got to learn to own our devices, because I got the feeling that right now, for many of us, our devices own us. We don't own them. Our devices are using us. We're not using them. And I think there's a cost to all this distraction, and that we're losing our ability to focus. Just think about this. Distraction leads to shallow thinking. Maybe you've had this before. You're thinking a deep thought, or at least you're on your way to thinking a deep thought, and then your phone buzzes or beeps, and that's it. It's over. Your entire thought is disrupted. So distraction leads to shallow thinking, and shallow thinking leads to shallow living. We can't live well unless we think well, and we can't think well if we're constantly being distracted, constantly being interrupted. Or as it pertains to relationships, distraction leads to shallow communication. And shallow communication leads to shallow relationships. You're having that heart-to-heart discussion with a person, and again, you hear the buzz or the bing, and you've lost them. That conversation, which was getting deep, is now essentially over until they can check their phone and put it back in and just relax again. So we need to learn to put our devices aside. You can go to the next slide. We need to stop responding every time our phone beeps or buzzes. We need to carve out times where we're just away from our phones. Just, you know what, when you're with your friends, just pile your phone somewhere and just be together. Or just don't feel that you need to look every time your phone makes some sort of movement or noise. You've got to learn to be undistracted in life. And then the third challenge, we've got mediation and distraction. The third might be overload, that just information never stops. You never reach the end of the information in this world. There's always new emails, new text messages, new blog posts, whatever it is. And I think a lot of this just keeps us from friendships and community, from things that mean more. Really, one of the things that happened is that information has become an end on its own. Information used to serve a purpose, I'd like to think, but now information is its own purpose. I think we feel like we need to keep up. This is something I've been dealing with lately, as I've really pulled back from a lot of social media. I felt there's this need to keep up with everything that's happening, with this constant torrent of information. And I went away on vacation this summer and just left social media behind, Twitter especially, and haven't gone back. And you know what? It's okay. It's been all right. I don't need to know all that's going on Twitter. I can still live my life, and it doesn't really add any value to my life. But somehow all that information seems necessary, but I don't think it is. I think we can forget that there's actually another way to live, where we're managing information instead of it managing us. I'd like to think information has traditionally served a purpose, that information was meant to give us knowledge, and knowledge was meant to give us wisdom. And maybe if we start to think in those terms again, if this information I'm getting all the time isn't growing my knowledge, and that knowledge isn't helping me live a wise life before the Lord, then I can just cut off that flow of information, and I'm still fine. I don't need all that information. That's why I got rid of Twitter, and it's been, I think, absolutely fine. Anyways, I'll leave you with this. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Whether you Facebook or tweet or text or email, do all to the glory of God. We as Christians ought to be thinking Christianly about our technology. We as Christians, I hope, can live in a way that's distinct, that's different from the people around us. Hopefully our great desire is to live in this world in a way that brings glory to God. We do that primarily by serving others, by expressing love for others. Whatever we do, whether we eat or drink, whether we use social media or iPhones, whatever it is, do it all to the glory of God. If that's our focus, I will use these things in such a way that I'm carrying out my purpose before the Lord, that I'm bringing glory to his name. I think we'll be doing okay. I'll leave it there for now. And then I was given a stack of cards that I've not yet looked at with questions on them. So, just want me to go through the questions? All right, so we're transitioning to something else, just like that. All right, this will be good. Where have you been traveling recently in the world? What's a story of a Christian brother or sister that you've been humbled or encouraged by? So I usually travel a fair bit, but usually not as much as I have over the last year and a half. I've been doing this big church history project. The premise of the project was to travel the world and to find historical objects through which I could tell the story of the Christian faith. And so that was my project for 2018, pretty much. It extended a little into 2019. It took me to 25 or 26 different countries around the world. And the end product is a book and a documentary that will be out early next year. It was an amazing year. Got to see some interesting things, got to meet some amazing people. We hit every continent and just really got to see what the Lord's up to. There are a few themes of the year. One of the themes was Americans. Just everywhere I went in the world, I'd come around a corner and there would be just some American there who the Lord had called to move there and just to serve in this quiet little ministry. It was just so massively encouraging to me to see what the Lord's doing through people like yourselves, just hearing the Lord, obeying his call and going around the world. A story of a Christian brother or sister that I was encouraged by. So one of the trips I really wanted to do, I've always been encouraged by Amy Carmichael and by her ministry. And so I wanted to go to India and see where she served at Dohnavur Fellowship, which is way down in the south of India. And so we went down there, and it's a hard place to get to. Many hours of driving, finally rolled in and was just blown away by the sheer size and scope of the ministry she created there, and just so blessed to see that it's still continuing and still doing well. And one of the people we met was one of the children that she came there as an infant into this orphanage that Amy Carmichael began. And that was when Amy was still alive, so she took this little baby in her arms and prayed for her and gave her a name. Now here we were all these years later talking to this woman who was one of the very last before Carmichael died. So it was just a joy to meet her and to hear some of her stories. She had dedicated her whole life to that ministry, to still serving it. And it was just a real blessing to be there and to hear the guy who was in charge of much of the ministry to just talk about the evils of the prosperity gospel and how that's harming their ministry and just wanting people to be preaching the true, pure gospel of Jesus Christ. There's not a lot of ministries in the world that last very long, so it was a joy to see one that's still there after many decades. Could you recap the themes of some of your most recent books? Sure. I've written 2 books in the Visual Theology series. Those are books where we attempt to describe theology through words, but also display theology through graphics. And so we had one come out a couple of years ago, and just a new one came out earlier this year. And so I work with an artist for that. And that was really our desire is, can we display truth? Not just describe it through words, but actually display it in images that would help people understand things that maybe they don't get through words as well. So we've written a couple of those. I wrote a book called Do More Better, which is about productivity, about living all of life for the good of others and the glory of God. It goes from the big theme of how to live life all the way down to the nitty-gritty of how to build a system that will hopefully help you stay organized in life and really just aim at that great goal of doing good to others, trusting that in turn brings glory to God. And then I wrote a book called Run to Win, which they've got outside, which is for men. And another book I don't think is out there. It's called Devoted. That was a kind of a passion project for me, which was as I was reading biographies, I came across story after story of Christian men whose foremost spiritual influence was his mother. And so I started reading more, looking for that theme. Who are some of the godly men in this world who would say, I owe it all to my mom? And ended up writing short biographies of some of those men and their moms. And so you got Charles Spurgeon in there, Hudson Taylor, Christopher Yuan, a more recent example, a bunch of people, Augustine, Timothy in Scripture. So it was a real blessing to me as someone who was closer to my mom than my dad growing up, and still is, I'd say. Just a blessing to see that moms can have this huge, huge influence in the lives of their sons. And so, yeah, that one was fun to write and is available on Amazon or whatever. How do you decide what to write on your blog, current events, personal life, etc., and how do you keep it gospel-centered? So my theme in the blog all these years, in the writing I do day by day, is really just, I think I'm a pretty normal person, so if it's of interest to me, it's probably of interest to other people. And so all I've been doing all these years is just writing about what's interesting to me and hoping that appeals to other people. So I just come up with just whatever seems interesting on a given day. I just write it out, and sometimes other people resonate with it, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, that's what I enjoy doing. And so sometimes I'll have something that I think is like, I think this is really going to make a difference in people's lives, and I write it out, and you can basically just hear crickets over the internet, just nothing. Or other times I just think, I'm just going to say why I don't let my kids do sleepovers, and I dash out an article in 15 minutes, and then CNN calls and wants to talk about it, and I think, I sure wish I'd put more time into that one. So even after all these years, I've got no gauge on what's interesting to people, what will be successful in that sense, what won't. I just like to think about how to live life in a distinctly biblical way, whether that's technology or other things. Just how does God's word apply to this? Part of the question is, how do you keep it gospel-centered? I don't really like the term gospel-centered, so I wouldn't say I do in that sense. I like to keep it biblical. So what does the Bible say about this? How does the Bible help me to live well in this challenge, in this role, whatever it is? That's been my passion and my interest for all these years. Having access to so many good teachings via the internet and podcasts has become a great encouragement to many people today. Do you think this may have a negative effect on the local church? Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think when people started listening to a lot of podcasts and when sermons started going out on YouTube, we did have a fear that people would switch their loyalties from their local church to their favorite pastor online. I think that is a temptation. I don't know that it's been happening as much as maybe we thought it would. I think one of the negative repercussions, I'm still working this one through in my mind, but I think one of the negative repercussions is all we put online is preaching. So we know our favorite pastors only by their preaching. But our local church pastors, we need them to be pastors, and there's far more to pastoring than preaching. So I'm wondering if, as people in conservative, Christian, reformed-ish Christians, gospel-centered, whatever this thing is, I'm wondering if we've made, this is probably going to come across as heresy, I'm wondering if we've made too much of preaching, that we're expecting too much preaching out of our pastors and not enough pastoring. If part of the cost of having access to so much great preaching has been that we've almost made an idol out of preaching. Now, preaching is good. We need preaching. The Bible commands it. We need it every Sunday. It's a core part of our Christian lives. But we need pastors to pastor. And there's far more to pastoring than just that act of preaching for 40 minutes on a Sunday morning. So that's what I'm working through in my mind now. If the big call on people today is to, big call on pastors today is to really pastor their churches and not just do that through the pulpit ministry. Instead, to get back to the old-fashioned pastoring of being with people, going to their hospital beds, going into their houses, praying with them, pastoring them closely, visiting them, inviting yourself into their lives, leading them. I just don't think there's been a lot of that. And I wonder if that's downstream from our obsession with listening to podcasts and watching preaching online if we sort of defined pastors around that one part of their role. It may not be. I'm still working that one out. But yeah, you can find on the pastor of this church isn't here, I can say this. You can always find better preaching online than you'll find in your local church. You always can, because you can see the absolute best preachers in the world doing their thing. But John Piper's never going to come and pray with you when you're in the hospital, and that's not his role. So we've got to have this unique role of pastoring the local church, and that's got to be a role that's far deeper and far wider than just delivering a sermon on Sunday morning. So, what would you say to a person who wants to grow in their faith but struggles prioritizing the disciplines necessary for that growth? Well, I think we all struggle with a lack of discipline, almost all of us. There's very few people who are naturally disciplined, and very few people who put disciplines in their life and keep at them evenly over the course of their life. So I think most of us struggle with prioritizing the spiritual disciplines. So I would say go easy on yourself in that sense. We all waver at different times, and I don't think God means for us to live in guilt for those things. Rather, just get back to the basics of the Christian life. And living the Christian life, it's not as hard as we make it out to be. It's pretty straightforward life. Putting sin to death, coming alive to righteousness, growing in our relationship with God. And we do that primarily through word and prayer, through the word as it's preached, of course, on Sundays, through the word as we read it day by day in our own lives, hopefully as we're reading it with our families, as we're encountering it through other believers. It's just immersing ourselves in the word and relating to God in prayer, just becoming completely dependent on prayer, praying before we do anything, praying on ahead of anything in our lives. There's some people, when you talk to them about their devotional lives, it just seems like they relate to God in a way that's just so intimate and so personal. Like they get up in the morning and they just like slow dance with Jesus for a half hour or something, and it just feels like something that you don't have. And I think a lot of us can be jealous of that. But I think there's some people who they kind of relate to all their friends in that way. They become friends with God and they just feel a lot. There's some of us who maybe relate a little more intellectually or something and don't feel the same way, don't have those same feelings of intimacy. So I found a lot of benefit in I'm just going to read God's word and trust that as I do that, as I commit to that discipline, I will grow closer to Him. I'm going to pray to God because He tells me to, and I believe intellectually that's the right thing to do. I don't think there's ever been a time in my life where over the long haul it's felt the way I wanted it to feel, but it's the right thing to do. So I've done it, and I think I've found the benefit to it. So I just caution people against that, allowing your feelings to dictate your walk with the Lord. Just do what the Lord tells you to do. There's just such joy in the Christian life and being obedient, doing what the Lord says to do, and He always, always blesses that kind of obedience, no matter how you feel. 2 more. What experiences have stood out and taught you the most over this last year or two? It's been an odd couple of years. There was a lot of travel, which was very disruptive. It was very good, but very disruptive. My son went off to college, which was very hard because he's just the kind of person you like to have around your house and not have far away. And I think I've also had a lot of problems with pain over the last couple of years. I'm kind of have been losing the ability to type. Just through we don't even know what it is, some problems with my hands and arms. So it's been a very disruptive couple of years, just a weird couple of years. And I think I think in a sense, my wife and I have grown a lot in a couple of years just through necessity. I think one of the greatest benefits of the last couple of years has been seeing my wife grow in her faith, in her walk with the Lord, and being able to count on her in whole new ways as I've gone through some stuff with the travel and with the health problems, having her more and more as just this pillar in my life. I don't think she'd mind me saying that. It took her a long time, so she came to faith through me when we were in first year of college. One of those kind of pseudo-missionary dating kind of stories that you shouldn't own up to. But she came to faith through me and became a believer. But it took her a long time to get into the disciplines of the Christian life. She had, when she met me, she had never set foot in a church and never heard the gospel and never heard about Jesus. She was just totally, utterly ignorant about all of those things. Her parents had never given her any religious background whatsoever. It took her a long time to grow into those disciplines. But a couple of years ago, we were at a conference and she met a woman who just kind of took her under her wing from afar. They live probably 1,200 miles apart, but have become fast friends and use these electronic media to keep up with one another. And she just put the challenge into Aileen's life in this new way where she's just grown in leaps and bounds over the last couple of years. And I don't know how we would have gotten through the last couple of years without that. So I think what stood out has just been a wife who's growing in godliness, and it's just been an absolute thrill. What more could you want for someone than to have them grow in godliness and to be able to have the closest view of that and reap the greatest benefit of that? It's been just a tremendous joy. Last question, what is your typical week with wife, family, church support, reading, blogging, and so on? So I kind of have two typical weeks. I have the typical week where I'm at home and the typical week where I'm on the road, which I do probably a week a month now. I'm somewhere. When I'm at home, so Sundays is church, we have a morning and an evening service, and the great benefit of an evening service is that you got to go back to church, which changes the entire period between the morning and the evening service, and usually that means you're receiving or extending hospitality. So I love an evening service because it kind of guards the whole day. You can't get into football. You just can't like football if you've got an evening service, because it happens right when the games are ending. The early games are ending and the late games are starting. Same with baseball. So it changes your day. It sets apart Sunday as a Lord's Day, which I've benefited from tremendously. So Sunday is reserved for church morning and evening, and usually in the afternoon. Mondays, I tend to write as much as I can through the day. Tuesdays, I go to the church office, and I'm not on staff or anything. I just keep showing up, and I show up for the staff meetings. It's great. I don't even have an office. But anyways, I do that, and I try and visit people. So in our church, we have the membership divided amongst all the elders. So I've got people, I'm their primary care elder, so I try and spend time with them, try and go visit hospitals or whatever I can do to just serve those people. After that, the rest of the week is pretty mundane. I do a lot of podcasts, people, on radio shows, that kind of thing. So those are usually done in the afternoons. But really, every morning I try and do as much writing and creative work as I can. Afternoons, I try and do as much administrative and just kind of bland work as I can. I'm at my best in the mornings creatively, so that's when I try and knock that stuff out. I have like a very, very boring life. There's really not much to say. I sit in a basement with a little window. It's a pretty mundane life. I just try and write and get with people as much as I can. So I guess I'll end it there. That's the last question.
Actually, I have one more question that got texted to me. So.
Okay, great.
And it might be similar to the one dealing with discipline, but I was just wondering if there's another little angle to this that you might speak to. It says, I would love to do more better, but so often I just don't want to. It seems I am often content to do less in a very mediocre fashion. How do I find motivation when I simply don't have any? So maybe speaking more to that motivation.
Yeah, almost every book on productivity that's been written is a book of law, not gospel. It's about do, try harder, be a better you, all of that. So almost all the books start with who do you want to be and how will you live that? Or what do you feel guilty about? How can you address that guilt? And so almost all of them are based on the law. What I've tried to do in my own life and then through my book is direct people to Christ and to the gospel, if you know who you are in Jesus Christ, you know what Christ has done for you, hopefully that generates within you this great heart of gratitude, this desire to serve God. And the way you serve God is by doing good to others. And so productivity, I think, understood through a Christian lens, is a life of just aiming at doing as much good for others as you can. As you do good for others, you get this great benefit of bringing glory to God. God is glorified through our good deeds. God is glorified through our acts of love and service. So when I'm lacking motivation, which I am a very lazy person. Part of the reason I had to spend so much time studying productivity and going to Scripture, first studying productivity, and it didn't work because it was just law, and I wasn't doing well under this crushing weight of law. So going to Scripture and saying, I've read all these books from the bookstore on productivity. How can I see God's view on it? Going to Scripture now gave me this, okay, I need to love other people. There's great joy, there's great freedom in loving other people and directing my life at loving other people. So part of what that involves is starting every day praying. I want to love other people today. How can I love? How can I use my time today in such a way that I'll be expressing love for others? And then taking time once a week, when I'm at my best, when this is really working, taking time once a week. Okay, God has given me this area of responsibility of the church. God has called me to serve these people, to shepherd these people. So I'm going to take some time to think deliberately, how can I do that in the week ahead? How can I express love for them? Okay, He's given me a wife and children. What can I do in the week to come that will express love for them? There is just such freedom in seeing that productivity isn't about finding personal fulfillment. It's about serving others. It's about loving others. It's about bringing glory to God. So when we live outside ourselves instead of just living for ourselves, we're living a completely different life, and one that's far more fulfilling, and far more sanctioned by God. And I think we just feel the joy of God as we live that way. So live outside yourself is the key, I think.
Yes, great.
Yeah.
Good answer. Thank you so much. Hey, thank you all for coming. Let's give Tim a hand.